Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply. In this video is to bring you a closer look at the Bommer number 5010-458-600. This is, as you can see, a large hinge. This is a wide throw hinge because it's wider than it is tall. This is a plain bearing 5-knuckle full mortise wide throw steel based 4.5 by 8 removable pin primed for painting hinge is what it is. Let's dissect the part number first of all. And to do so, let's take a look at the link below this video to a document called Cut Sheet. And that document is handy because it allows us to kind of dissect the part number and also realize what the different, sort of derivatives there are of this sort of hinge. And there are plenty. So, first of all, 50 in the part number is going to mean that this is a full mortise hinge. It's going to be a hinge that, as you can see from the swag on the hinge leafs, when the leafs are brought parallel, they're meant to be mortised flush to the edge of the door and frame. Now we got 50 so far. That also means that it is a 5-knuckle hinge. It also means it's plain bearing. There are no bearing packets between any of those knuckles. It also means well, that's actually all that it means at this point. The next digit over is the 1. That specifically means that this is a wide throw hinge, that it is wider than it is tall. We'll go over that in a moment. The last 0 specifically stands for the fact that this hinge is steel based. And we'll pick that up again in a moment. Now the 458, that is a reference to the size. That means that this hinge is 4.5 inches tall and 8 inches wide. Now it is crucial that it's understood that the height is the first dimension when you are talking about hinges. You would never call this 8 by 4.5. It's specifically height by width. Now, you wouldn't really make that mistake on a 4.5 by 8 or an 8 by 4.5. But if it was 5 by 4.5 or 4.5 by 5, well, or that's not really a great example. Or 4.5 by 4, 5 by 4.5, it's really important to know that the height is first. You don't want to mix those two up. Height is first. Available in all common sizes, everywhere from 3.5 to 5. So you can get 3.5, 4.5, 3.5, 4, 4.5, and 5 inch tall, 5 inch, 6 inch, 7 inch, 8 inch wide. In almost any of those combinations, you couldn't get a 3.5 by 8, but you could get a 4.5 by 8. This is a 4.5 inch height hinge is really appropriate for a door that's 1 3/4 thick. If your door was thinner than that, 4.5 tall isn't appropriate because of how those holes are spaced out. And speaking of these screw holes, there are in that link to the cut sheet, there are actual dimensions showing where those holes are laid out. This is called a template pattern. Template is the important word. All wood and all machine screws are included in a complementary finish, this being just primed. They're just going to be primed, ready for paint. Now the 600 in the part number stands for two things. As mentioned earlier, it stands for the fact that this is a steel-based hinge and that it is prime coat. That link to the cut sheet shows in the lower left-hand corner 3 columns: steel-based hinges, brass or bronze-based hinges, and stainless-based hinges, and you can see how that last number changes. So if you were doing a hinge that you wanted it to be a stainless steel, it wouldn't be a 5010, it'd be a 5012 at that point. So now you can determine how your part number will change based on the needs of what you must have the hinge to be in terms of providing you. So this hinge is available obviously in steel-based, brass, or bronze, which is dependent on the finish, and it's available in all the common finishes. Your chromes, your brasses, your bronze, your nickels, satin, polished, antique, oil rubbed in a bronze. Bommer can do pretty much any of these finishes. They can do zinc, they can do black japanned, in a variety of very unusual finishes as well. They're capable of doing all of that. Back to that chart, you can see where the 5000 becomes an 8000 series number, and the only difference there is that it becomes a 3-knuckle hinge versus a 5-knuckle hinge. 8000 is a 3-knuckle hinge. When you add the BB to your 5-knuckle hinges, it'll give you ball bearing. And when you add a ball bearing feature to the 3-knuckle hinge, it becomes LB, because that is Bommer's concealed, maintenance-free sort of bearing construction. So it becomes an LB at that part, for that part, I should say. Okay, so that concludes the review of the cut sheet. There is a link below this video to a video that helps determine how you go about figuring out what size of wide throw hinge you need. This is a very large hinge. This hinge is, you know, possibly 2.5 inches wider than a standard hinge that you would be using. And really where you're going to use a hinge like this is when you have an unusually thick amount of casing or brick mold or some sort of treatment on the pull side of the door attached to the frame, that when the door opens up, it needs to actually get out and around so that it can go, flush to the face of the wall, is where you're going to use this. If your door is only going to open in 90 degree, then you not need to get around then that unusual treatment to the wall, you might have shutters, let's say, installed. Then a wide throw hinge may not be so important. Another reason that you're going to use this is, imagine a very thick wall and your door is actually set in deeper into the frame than standard. When you stand on the pull side of a door and frame and you run your hand over it, that door is inset ever so slightly into the frame, 3/32 of an inch, generally something very small like that. Well, imagine if that dimension was 1 inch. It's certainly very possible. You don't see it often, but I've seen it in construction of buildings that go back to the 19th and very early 20th century, where there's a 3-story sort of building. The original Capitol building of the state of Iowa is full of hinges, doors that are set deep into like 16-inch thick walls, and they have these gigantic wide throw hinges because you've got a 16-inch thick wall, a frame, and then those doors are set in the center of it. And that would be an example, albeit an exaggerated example, of where you would also use a wide throw hinge. So why the client is using an 8-inch on this order, it's just because the math works out based on that calculation that 8 inches is the proper size that you would need for this. And if you have any questions on how to determine, the proper wide throw hinge, by all means, feel free to reach out to us. The last thing I'd like to point out to you, well, actually, before we wrap it up, options on this hinge, and while they would be very atypical, you could, of course, get this with radius corners, 1/4 inch or 5/8. This is obviously square corner. You can get this with a variety, with a few different security options, like a non-removable pin. If you were installing this on an exterior door that swung out, you would certainly want to consider a non-removable pin, or perhaps maybe a security stud, which is a piece of metal that sticks out of the face of one leaf, and there's a hole that is in the other leaf, and when the door closes, the stud rests into the hole, so if somebody were to drive the pin out, you still couldn't slide the leaves apart. Of course, decorative tips. This is what is called a button tip. If you use your imagination, it looks like the button on a coat. You can do ball tip, button tip, ball tip, urn tip, steeple tip, acorn tip. All of that is possible. And then, of course, all of the other finish options, size options. You can even custom order these in a thicker grade material as well. If you have any questions on the Bommer 5010-458-600 or any other Bommer product, and you can see the logo there right above it, it says Made in USA, a fact that Bommer is quite proud of, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.